In a grand dream, guided by the pillow immortal. If life could be lived again, if she could return to 15 years ago, back to that small village with barking dogs and chirping cicadas, she would certainly avoid meeting him, taking him in and raising him. She would most definitely avoid falling in love with him. Jin Zun Shui, Xian Niang. In a dim, damp hut, Xian Niang lay on her back, barely breathing. She knew she was at death's door, but she was full of hatred. She couldn't accept dying like this. She wanted to wait for Qiao Yunhuan to return, to ask him face to face if he had any conscience left, if he truly could be so heartless towards her. If she hadn't taken him in when he was 7, in the ice and snow, he wouldn't have survived that winter. Over the years, they had relied on each other for survival. She scrimped and saved, working from dawn to dusk, raising him, sending him to school, and supporting him into adulthood. She was his sister, mother, and later, his wife. She had painstakingly awaited his success in the imperial examinations, his rise to fame. Yet, in the capital, he married a noble lady, abandoning her cruelly, leaving her to die miserably in this neglected black hut. This ungrateful wretch, if she didn't see him one last time, remember his face, and become a vengeful ghost after death to haunt him, how could she rest in peace? The cold wind battered the window panes. The night was lonely and chill. Xian Niang clenched her teeth, tears of deep hatred streaming down her face. Suddenly, she heard a soft laugh, almost enchanting. Dying here all alone, are you willing? She shivered, her eyes darting around in terror. Apart from herself, there was no one else in the room. She suspected she was hallucinating in her dying moments. But then she heard another voice. Betrayed by the child you raised yourself, dying miserably in this black hut, are you really willing? At this, Xian Yang was certain it wasn't a hallucination. Someone was indeed speaking to her. Breathing heavily, she asked, Who are you? Unable to move her body, she rolled her eyes in search, her voice trembling. Where are you? The voice chuckled as if blowing a breath into her ear, slowly uttering words that made her blood run cold. I'm right under your head. A rush of hot blood surged to her head. Before she could react, a white mist enveloped the ebony pillow beneath her head. Amidst the ancient wooden fragrance, a figure suddenly materialized in midair. A youth in a brown robe, barefoot, with snow-white skin and flowing black hair, bearing a face of ethereal beauty. His entire being exuded a transcendent aura, like that of an immortal. Xian Yang stared in awe. The youth winked mischievously at her and said with a smile, Do you know who I am? Of course, Xian Yang couldn't answer. Clearing his throat, the youth adopted a grand demeanor and announced, Xian Yang, I am the Pillow Immortal. Pitying your tragic fate, I am willing to offer you a chance at rebirth. Do you accept? Each word resonated clearly in the room, entering Xian Yang's ears. Her eyes widened in disbelief. The youth repeated his question from midair. Do you accept? This time, in the boundless darkness, Xian Yang didn't hesitate. With a hoarse voice, summoning her last ounce of strength, she shouted with burning determination, I accept. In the bronze mirror, the person staring back had bright eyes and white teeth, fair and smooth skin, and hair like clouds, exuding the unique beauty and vitality of a young girl. This was a stark contrast to the figure lying in the dark, damp hut, waiting to die miserably. Xian Yang gazed at the face in the mirror, unable to believe her eyes. She reached out her hand, gently touching her cheek, her voice trembling uncontrollably. I'm back. I'm really back. The young man hadn't lied to her. He truly was the Pillow Immortal, and at her dying moment, he had given her a new life. Outside, the wind and snow howled. As Xian Yang reveled in her newfound vitality, a series of intermittent knocks suddenly came from the door. The knocking startled her, and when she turned back, her face was devoid of color. Could it be? Had she returned to that year? Her breathing became erratic as she walked towards the door, trying to calm her racing heart, before flinging it open. A child was huddled in the wind and snow outside. He looked up, pale and weak, but with an incredibly obedient demeanor. Xian trembled violently, her eyes welling up with tears, her heart feeling like it was being squeezed mercilessly, causing unbearable pain. It was that year, that winter, when she met Xiao Yinhuan. She had taken in the starving, freezing boy who was about to collapse in the snow at her doorstep. She would never forget that year. She was 14, and he was 7. She was just a child herself, yet she had gritted her teeth to shield Xiao Yinhuan from the wind and snow, supporting a household for him. But what did Xiao Yinhuan do later? This monster she had raised with her own hands had pushed her into an abyss from which there was no return. The small child sat in the wind and snow, seemingly oblivious to Xianyang's abnormal reaction. He fluttered his long eyelashes, timidly reaching out to tug at her skirt like a pitiful kitten. "Sister, can I please have some hot soup? I'm so cold and hungry. I can't bear it anymore." Xianyang looked at him, her teeth chattering with cold fury. Yes, it was this face, this pitiful look that had deceived her back then, softening her heart and making her take him in. She had thought she was adopting a pure, innocent little white rabbit, not knowing she was bringing the most venomous snake into her home. Having been reborn, Xianyang would no longer be fooled by this face. She harbored only deep-seated hatred for him, hatred so intense she almost wanted to strangle him. The small child cowered at her feet, looking up and tugging at her skirt again, pleading, "Sister, please, just a mouthful of hot soup. Just one mouthful, please. Get away from me. Don't touch me." Xianyang stepped back, violently shaking off the child on the ground. The child froze, Xianyang glaring at him, gritting her teeth. "Go die." The child seemed unable to believe his ears. Xianyang shouted again, "Xiao Yinhuan, go die." Something was about to burst out of her chest. Her eyes reddened, her whole body trembling uncontrollably with emotion, and she screamed hysterically, "You should have died in the snow this year. I never should have saved you. You heartless beast. Get as far away from me as possible. Not a mouthful of hot soup, not even a grain of rice will I give you. If you're going to die, do it far away from my door. Don't dirty my doorstep." The child was left stunned by her outburst. Xianyang didn't care if he understood or not, slamming the door shut with a bang, sending a flurry of snowflakes into his face. In the freezing cold, the child remained motionless for a long time. Inside, Xianyang leaned against the door, sliding down to the floor in exhaustion. After a long while, she covered her face, tears streaming down like rain. "You ungrateful wretch. Why did I save you back then? Why did I raise you? I was so good to you. I deprived myself of food and clothing, worked from dawn to dusk to earn money, so you could study and have a proper home. And you treat me like this. Are you even human? Do you have a heart at all?" Her stifled sobs seemed to reach outside. The child stood there, listening in a daze, his eyes gradually welling up. After what seemed like an eternity, he murmured absently amidst the wind and snow, "Xianyang, so the pillow immortal brought you back too." His face turned calm, shedding the pitiful look of a child, adopting the demeanor and tone of an adult. Inside this 7-year-old body was now the 22-year-old Xiao Yinhuan. When he rushed back to the manor and learned of Xianyang's fate, he dashed into that cold, damp hut, fearing he wouldn't even get to see her one last time, believing he had lost her forever. But who could have guessed that, in the midst of his heart-wrenching agony, a brown figure suddenly appeared in midair. Guided by the pillow immortal, he felt like he was falling into a dream. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself back in that snowy winter, in the form of a starving, freezing child shivering by her door. Xianyang, I'm back too." The small child trembled under the vast sky, overwhelmed with emotion. Heaven knows how grateful he felt at this moment, thanking the unexpectedly appeared pillow immortal, thanking the heavens for giving him this second chance. He buried himself in the snow, both ecstatic and tearful. "Xianyang, I'm sorry. In this life, let's start over, okay? Forget the pain and hurt, begin anew. I promise I won't fail you again." Xianyang didn't open the door all night, with the cold wind knocking on the window and the snowstorm howling outside. She hardly slept a wink. The next day, when she finally stepped outside, she was astonished to find Xiao Yunhuan still sitting by the door, knees hugged to his chest, covered in snowflakes. As soon as he saw her, he quickly lifted his pitiful gaze. Frost clung to his long eyelashes, and tears shimmered in his dark, pleading eyes. "Sister, please take me in. I promise to be obedient and help you with many tasks." His helpless and innocent appearance could melt the heart of any woman, but Xianyang, reborn and hardened, remained expressionless, uttering a cold word, "Go. Don't let me see you again." She passed by him directly, heading towards the pigsty. Xiao Yunhuan's eyes flickered. He naturally knew what she was going to do and hurriedly followed. "Sister, let me help you." He rushed to lift the bucket of swill water beside the pigsty. His small stature and hunger made him weak, his steps unsteady. Still, he managed to flash a pleasing smile at Xianyang. "Sister, let me help you with the chores. You can leave everything to me." Standing in the snowstorm, Xianyang's emotions were complicated. She remembered in her previous life, she never let Xiao Yunhuan do any work. Whenever neighbors asked, she would pour swill water into the pigsty, proudly declaring, "I won't let him work. My Xiao is a scholar. His hands are for holding pens and writing. How could he do such things?" An old aunt living next door shook her head sadly. "Xianyang, you're so good to this child. I hope he won't turn out to be ungrateful, and maybe he'll treat you better, not wasting all your care and effort like this." Without hesitation, Xianyang replied, "Of course, my Xiao will definitely treat me well." Back then, when Xiao Yunhuan returned from school, she could be heard joyfully telling the old aunt, "My Xiao is doing well. He's so smart and does well in his studies. He's sure to have a bright future and become an official." The old aunt sighed softly. "I'm afraid when he becomes an official, he might not want you anymore. That child has high ambitions, I can tell. He might feel embarrassed by you and won't recognize you." "How could that be?" Xianyang raised her eyebrows, displeased with the old aunt's skepticism about her Xiao. She defended him fervently. "Xiao isn't an ungrateful person. When he becomes an official, he won't forget me. He'll definitely take me to live in a big house, eat delicacies, and let me enjoy a comfortable life." Nearby, Xiao Yunhuan listened quietly to these words, saying nothing. He simply put down his books, quietly approached, and took the swill bucket from Xianyang's hands. With a low voice, he said, "Sister, let me help you." Seeing him return, Xianyang was overjoyed. She pushed him gently. "Go inside quickly. It's cold out here. Don't let yourself freeze. I've brewed soup for you. It's on the table. Drink it while it's hot. Then, do the homework your teacher assigned. Don't slack off." In her chatter and admonitions, Xiao Yunhuan suddenly reddened his eyes. Avoiding the old aunt's gaze, he buried his head in Xianyang's neck, each word carrying a misty sense of determination. "Sister, rest assured. When I become an official, I will never abandon you. I will definitely take you to live in a big house, treat you to delicacies, and let you enjoy a good life." In that year, Xiao Yunhuan had just turned 10, and he had grown quickly, now almost as tall as Xianyang. When he spoke those words, Xianyang paused, her vision suddenly blurred with mist. Standing amidst the swirling snowstorm, she reached out and tightly embraced him, her heart warming as if bathed in the gentle rays of spring. But those memories were so distant now. Looking back, it felt like another world, or perhaps it had truly been another life. Could she still naively believe in this innocent face before her, or would she be deceived by him once again? Xianyang clenched her hands tightly and uttered a cold word to the frail child before her. "Go." The child stumbled backward, still holding the heavy swill bucket, struggling towards the pigsty. Unable to restrain herself any longer, Xianyang lunged forward and harshly pulled him back. "Didn't I tell you to leave?" she scolded. With that tug, The child lost his footing in the snowstorm, the swill bucket crashing to the ground, splashing him and leaving him sprawled in the snow, bruised and battered. Xianyang's eyes widened in shock. Instinctively, she moved forward to lift him up, but stopped herself just in time. Standing under the vast sky, she bit her lip. In the snowy landscape, the small figure lifted his head timidly, rubbing his reddened eyes. He looked pitifully at Xianyang, his expression pleading, "Sister, I'm sorry for spilling the swill bucket. Please don't be angry with me." Facing such a kitten-like face, Xianyang hesitated, her heart filled with a mixture of hatred and helplessness, as if trapped in cotton, unable to vent her frustrations. After standing in the snowstorm for what seemed like an eternity, she finally spoke to him in a soft voice, "Come with me. Let's go inside and wash up." The child's eyes lit up with relief, nodding quickly as he obediently followed Xianyang into the house. In the midst of the storm, unseen by anyone, beneath his pitiful tears, a faint smile suddenly appeared on Xiao Yunhuan's face, filled with excitement and joy. After employing a bitter meat strategy, Xiao Yunhuan successfully stayed by Xianyang's side as he had wished. Stepping once again into that warm and familiar home, his heart surged with emotions that were difficult to calm, and his eyes moistened quietly. At night, Xianyang sat by the bedside, gazing at the peacefully sleeping face, lost in deep contemplation. Her heart was in turmoil, filled with countless thoughts. Finally, she sighed deeply and murmured, "Maybe in this lifetime, you truly have a kind heart and won't turn into a heartless betrayer, disappointing me." The snow-covered night was silent, offering no response. She reached out to touch that fair and delicate face, lingering by the bedside for a long while before finally leaving. Unaware, the child behind her suddenly opened his eyes and softly said to her retreating figure, "Sister, rest assured, in this lifetime, I will never let you down again." Days passed one by one in this humble yet warm little home, with the siblings depending on each other as if returning to a past life. However, Xianyang often felt bewildered, a faint sense of unreality lingering in her heart, as if everything was somehow unreal. She still lay in that dark little room, waiting for death in utter despair. But as he grew taller and treated her better with each passing day, Xiao Yunhuan, alive and standing before her eyes, assured her that everything was indeed real. She often couldn't believe it. Had she really found solace after enduring so much hardship in life? More than Xianyang's uncertainties, Xiao Yunhuan was more concerned about the illness he had carried since birth. This illness had caused great suffering to both him and Xianyang in their previous life. To treat him, Xianyang had nearly married an old man. The memory of that bitter experience filled Xiao Yunhuan's heart with pain whenever he thought about Xianyang. Xianyang's father was a butcher who had died when she was very young. She had inherited his profession and began butchering pigs at a young age, selling pork in the city to support herself. She was not a gentle girl. On the contrary, everyone said she was fierce and would never accept a loss. Her only tenderness was probably reserved for Xiao Yunhuan alone. Because she was pretty and fatherless, with only a child by her side, local ruffians often harassed her. Though uneducated and not as clever as Xiao Yunhuan, she had a fearless fierceness. Anyone who dared to bully her would have to face her kitchen knife, brandishing it aggressively at the door with a terrifying posture. "If you dare to come, try my butcher skills at the Xin family, and I'll cut each of you, no compromise. Do you believe it?" Xiao Yunhuan stood by the door, peering at Xianyang. She brandished the butcher's knife fearlessly, saying, "My Xiao still needs to study. Whoever dares to scare him, I'll chop off both their ears. If they don't care for their lives, they can come and try." The ruffians were merely teasing Xianyang to gain some advantage. Seeing her fierceness, they didn't dare to risk their lives and chuckled, "Little lady is so fierce," before dispersing. Xianyang finally sighed with relief, her knife lowering as cold sweat covered her back. Turning around, she caught sight of Xiao Yunhuan by the door and couldn't help but pause. "What are you doing standing here? Hurry inside. Have you finished today's tasks assigned by the master?" Xiao Yunhuan remained silent, tears welling up in his eyes. They locked gazes, and an indescribable bitterness surged within Xianyang. Quickly sniffing, she pretended as if nothing had happened and said, "What's wrong with crying? Sister is fine, right? Stop crying." Step by step, Xiao Yunhuan approached her, suddenly reaching out and tightly embracing her. She was taken aback, quickly dropping the knife in fear of hurting him. He bit his lip and whispered in her ear, "Those people, when I grow up, I won't let any of them off." The siblings stood in a miserable embrace in the courtyard. The next-door old lady tremblingly walked out, sighing, "Xianyang, this won't do. You need to find a good match soon. With a man to rely on, those ruffians won't dare to harass you." Xianyang hesitated, instinctively holding the child in her arms tighter, biting her lip, but saying nothing. That night, as they ate, she suddenly looked up and said to him, "Xiao, I've raised you. Will you be my husband?" Xiao Yunhuan nearly choked on his rice, staring at Xianyang seriously. He couldn't help but laugh and cry, "Sister." Xianyang seemed to have thought deeply before making this decision. "From now on, don't call me sister anymore. Call me Xianyang. How about that?" She counted on her fingers as if calculating something and murmured, "Boys grow up fast. In a few more years, you'll be taller than me. If we go out together, no one will say we don't match." Xiao Yunhuan remained stunned. Xianyang finally noticed his hesitation and awkwardly asked, "What's wrong? Are you unwilling? Don't you want to be my husband? Are you afraid that I'm older than you?" No, it's just..." Xiao Yunhuan stuttered suddenly, unsure how to respond to Xianyang. This change came too suddenly. He had never even thought about it before. Xianyang stared at him motionlessly, her eyes gradually losing their sparkle, but she quickly smiled at him. "All right, I'm just kidding with you. Look how scared I've made you. I'll go to the kitchen to work." She swiftly gathered the dishes and stood up, carrying them to the kitchen. Xiao Yunhuan sneaked to the door, watching her wash the dishes while something fell into the basin, creating ripples one after another. His heart suddenly felt heavy, sinking down against the door, staring at the stars above, uncertain about what he should do next. Over the next few years, subtle changes began to take place. Xiao Yunhuan often found himself lost in thought, gazing at Xianyang's departing figure. He had grown considerably, now a handsome young man. In the city, several girls started visiting the school just to catch a glimpse of him, shyly presenting him with various small gifts, but he turned them all down. When he picked up his books, it was Xianyang's face that came to mind. It wasn't until then that he realized, in his confusion, that he could actually call her Xianyang. But before he could find an opportunity to tell her this, one ordinary afternoon, he suddenly fainted in the school. When he woke up, he overheard Xianyang and the doctor conversing behind a curtain. The doctor sighed, "This illness is hard to treat. He's had it since birth, and the required medicinal herbs are extremely rare. It'll cost a fortune. With your family situation, it's difficult. I think you should." "No, I won't give up on Xiao. Regardless, I will cure him. Doctor, please wait for me. I will gather the money." Xianyang's pleading voice came in fragments. Xiao Yunhuan, his face pale, turned to gaze out the window at the drifting clouds, unmoving. A tear rolled down his cheek as he suddenly realized that he might never be able to call her Xianyang after all. At the age of 15, Xiao Yunhuan, with a desperate heart, walked under the moonlight, step by step into the icy river, seeking to end his own life. Xianyang rushed to the riverbank and screamed, "Xiao." She plunged into the water without hesitation, pulling him out. For the first time in all these years, she raised her hand and struck him. "What are you doing? Are you out of your mind from taking medicine? Are you trying to force me to death?" He lay on his back under the moonlight, trembling with tears streaming down his face. "Sister, I don't want to be treated anymore. I can't bear to see you marry that old man. Please return all the betrothal gifts. I'd rather drown myself now than ruin your life." "What old man?" Xianyang wiped her face, biting her lip in the wind. You, who have read the classics, have no manners? That's Lord Ouyang. He was a scholar official, full of knowledge and gentle manners, not the old man you described. Xiao Yinhuan's eyes reddened, shouting, "He's 65. He's retired from the court for years. He could be your grandfather. Isn't he an old man?" Suddenly, Shen Xianyang slapped him across the face. Xiao Yinhuan froze. Shen Xianyang, her voice hoarse under the moon, said, "Let me tell you, I am committed to Lord Ouyang. The betrothal gifts cannot be returned. You must treat your illness. If you still seek death, I won't stop you. Go ahead, but I'll be with you on the road to the afterlife." That night, Xiao Yinhuan would never forget. It was as if he had shed a lifetime of tears. At the moment when Shen Xianyang left with Lord Ouyang, Xiao Yinhuan chased after the carriage, his figure stretched long by the setting sun. Finally, he shouted out the deeply buried term of endearment in his heart, "Xianyang, Xianyang, please don't go." The high carriage carried her away, taking her all the way to the Ouyang residence, where she would soon wear the bright red bridal attire and marry Lord Ouyang, who could easily be her grandfather. His heart twisted in pain as he chased after the carriage in the wind, crying out hoarsely, "Please, please don't go. Xianyang, didn't you say that you raised me and I would be your husband? I've finally grown up and can marry you. How can you leave? Even if I have only one day left in my life, I want to be with you. Please stay." He desperately chased the carriage, never feeling so frantic before. Amidst the swirling dust, his frail body finally couldn't bear it, and he collapsed. Yet the carriage abruptly halted. In the twilight, Shen Xianyang leaped out of the carriage and ran towards him, tears streaming down her face. "Xiao Qiao, Xiao Qiao." Lord Ouyang also dismounted from the carriage and watched them embrace and weep in the sunset, his eyes revealing reluctance. Finally, he shook his head faintly. "Enough, enough." Shen Xianyang was right. He truly was a refined scholar who couldn't force the impossible. The carriage carried him away alone, leaving not only Shen Xianyang but also all the betrothal gifts behind. It wasn't until that year that Xiao Yinhuan understood what it meant to lose and regain something. The night wind rattled the window frames. The young man woke from his dream again, wiping tears from his eyes. He couldn't count how many times he had dreamed like this, always dreaming of the past life, chasing after the carriage, feeling that heart-wrenching despair. Even in this life, where he had planned ahead and advised Shen Xianyang to start a shop early, ensuring their financial stability so she wouldn't have to worry about medicine money, he still dreamt of this segment. Perhaps the trauma of nearly losing Shen Xianyang in his past life left too deep a shadow. Lost in thought, he heard footsteps outside the door. Shen Xianyang, draped in her robe, whispered softly, "Xiao Qiao, are you asleep?" Xiao Yinhuan steadied his breathing and quickly replied, "Not yet, sister." "What's wrong? Have you taken your medicine tonight?" Shen Xianyang seemed to ask every now and then in recent days, needing to confirm repeatedly before she could rest assured. Perhaps she, too, was scared off by the past life. In this life, Shen Xianyang and Xiao Yinhuan lived much better. She managed the business, and Xiao Yinhuan helped her wholeheartedly. In just a few years, their shop expanded several times over. She no longer had to sell herself for money, but the experiences from the past life still haunted her. "Xiao Qiao, do you know? I had a nightmare. I dreamed that you were seriously ill, and I couldn't raise enough money anywhere, so I had to marry an old man over 60. You chased after me behind the carriage, begging me not to go. It's strange, isn't it? Even though your illness is almost cured, why do I still have this dream?" Shen Xianyang stood outside the door murmuring, and Xiao Yinhuan's heart tightened, his eyes reddening. He took a deep breath. "Because you care too much about me, too afraid of losing me." They both feared losing the beauty of this life. Outside the door, Shen Xianyang fell silent. Xiao Yinhuan smiled through tears, suddenly uttering each word in the quiet night. "Sister, no. Xianyang, when my illness is completely cured, let's get married, okay?" The calamity of a severe illness was finally safely overcome. For Xiao Yinhuan and Shen Xianyang, Life ushered in another crucial turning point. Marriage, or one could say, the rush to the capital for the imperial examination. These two events happened simultaneously, as in the previous life. Xiao Yinhuan married Xian before rushing to the capital, pledging eternal love to each other. At that time, Xian was perhaps the happiest woman under the heavens. She nestled in Xiao's arms, gently stroking his features, softly calling him husband. Her Xiao had long grown into a handsome young man, with broad shoulders capable of bearing the weight of the world for her. He was better than any man in the world, and she could only hold him in her heart. He was her Xiao, her husband. In the quiet of the night, he held her hand, lightly kissing her fingertips, smiling as he told her that their home would grow larger and larger in the future, and they would have many, many children. He hoped to have several daughters who all looked like her. She leaned against his chest, listening to his strong heartbeat, squinting her eyes slightly, feeling warmth reaching deep into her heart, sweet as honey. Those short days were as beautiful as fireworks, dazzling and brilliant, but they disappeared in an instant, leaving nothing behind, all shattered by the relentless reality that followed. In this life, Xian agreed to marry Xiao Yinhuan but adamantly refused to let him take the imperial examination again. Xiao Yinhuan understood. She was afraid, after all, of the tragic experiences she had suffered in the previous life. He didn't want her to recall those painful memories again, but he had to persuade her. In fact, his journey to the examination wasn't for fame and fortune but for something very important that needed to be done. Only after completing it could he truly let go of everything and live happily with her for the rest of their lives. The night was cool, the wind whispered softly, and the shadows of the trees swayed under the moonlight. Today was Xian's birthday. Xiao Yinhuan personally cooked and made a bowl of longevity noodles for her. There were no other people in the courtyard, just the two of them sitting under the moon, as if they had returned to the peaceful little village and the days when they depended on each other. The originally harmonious atmosphere was shattered when Xian heard Xiao Yinhuan bring up the old topic again. She almost smashed the bowl of longevity noodles on the table. "No, I won't agree. I absolutely won't agree to you rushing to the capital for the examination. Give up on this idea." Xiao Yinhuan became anxious. "Then why did you send me to school and let me study so much from childhood? What was the point? I sent you to study so that you could be knowledgeable and sensible, not necessarily to take the imperial examination. With our family's business doing so well now, can't you stay and manage a few shops? Why must you go to the imperial city to become an official?" "I don't want to become an official. I want to." "What do you want to do?" Xian's eyes reddened suddenly, and the image of him walking with another woman from the previous life flashed through her mind. Xiao Yinhuan didn't know how to explain to her. I want to. In short, please believe me." "How can I believe you?" Xian's eyes were even redder, her body trembling violently. Seeing her like this, Xiao Yinhuan felt heartbroken and spoke urgently. "Xianyang, I swear I will never let you down in this life. I really need to do something very important. We can't drag this on any longer. His Majesty will visit Bailong Temple for a few days in March to enjoy the flowers. If we miss this opportunity, I'll have to go back to rely on that grand tutor Lu." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly realized his face turned pale, and he stopped talking, but it was already too late. Xianyang stood up abruptly in the wind, staring at him intently, word by word. "Who is Grand Tutor Lu? How do you know Grand Tutor Lu?" She looked at his ever-changing face and suddenly, as if struck by lightning, an expression of disbelief and almost distorted horror appeared on her face. "Who are you? Who exactly are you?" Xianyang could never forget how heartlessly Xiao Yinhuan had treated her in the previous life. Before he rushed to the capital for the imperial examination, they married. When she saw him off from their small village, he said, "Xianyang, wait for me. I will make sure you live a good life when I return." But he never came back. She waited at home for 2 years, but there was never any news from him. Unable to bear it any longer, she traveled far and wide to the imperial city, asking everyone she met until she finally found the magnificent Xiao mansion. It turned out he had already become the top scholar in the imperial examination, married the daughter of a grand tutor Lu from the court, and risen to become the youngest grand justice minister. She watched as he stepped out of the carriage, supporting Lady Lu, or should she say, Madame Qiao. Her belly was prominently swollen, looking like she was already 7 or 8 months pregnant, about to give birth. No wonder Xiao Yunhuan was so nervous, speaking to her in gentle tones, afraid she might be uncomfortable in any way. They looked so affectionate, just like they used to be. In the wind, Xianyang suddenly remembered those quiet nights they spent together and how Xiao Yunhuan had softly whispered in her ear about having many children in the future, hoping for several daughters who would all look like her. Under the vast sky, a cold wind blew over Xianyang's frail body. Her eyes reddened, and hot blood almost rushed to her head as she disregarded everything and rushed forward. Xiao Qiao, Xiao Qiao. At the moment Xiao Yunhuan saw Xianyang, his face changed abruptly. Lady Lu even staggered back in shock, exclaiming, "Who's this crazy woman? Stop her. Don't disturb my child." "Xiao Qiao, tell me what's going on. I waited for you at home for 2 years, and you never came back. Do you really not want me anymore? I don't believe you would betray me." At that moment, Xianyang had lost her rationality, insisting that Xiao Yunhuan give her an answer. Ironically, was there ever an answer? Didn't the old neighbor predict it perfectly that year? She's afraid that when he becomes an official, he won't want you anymore. That child has high aspirations. I can see it. Maybe in the future, he'll be embarrassed by you and won't recognize you once he becomes an official. But Xianyang didn't believe it. She didn't believe it at all, until Xiao Yunhuan hesitated and said to Lady Lu, "She's a distant cousin from my hometown, who was abandoned by her husband and went insane. Don't pay any attention to her." With a heart completely filled with despair, she burst into heart-wrenching sobs, rushing forward to hit Xiao Yunhuan in a disheveled manner. "You're lying. I am clearly your wife, married and officially so. Do you have any conscience left, Xiao Yunhuan? Don't go mad again. Guards, lock her up." Unable to bear it any longer, Xiao Yunhuan finally pushed her away, and she hit the stone lion at the door hard, curled up on the ground in pain, blood slowly seeping from her body. Xiao Yunhuan's face turned pale. Xianyang lifted her head, cold sweat streaming down her forehead. She had never felt such pain before, so painful that her consciousness began to blur. "Xiao Qiao, you promised me. You said you wouldn't betray me. You said you would make sure I live a good life, that our home would grow larger and larger in the future, and we would have many children, didn't you?" How ironic those vows were, like a ridiculous dream. When she woke up, Xianyang not only lost her husband and home but also forever lost the ability to be a mother. That collision with the sharp stone lion struck her at her most vulnerable spot, leaving her incapable of bearing children ever again. Xiao Yunhuan arranged for her to recuperate at the Qiao mansion, and everyone praised his kindness for caring so meticulously for this insane cousin. Xianyang lay in the dark room, unable to even muster a bitter smile. She felt chilled from head to toe, like a deep, dry well. While her physical wounds slowly healed, her hatred in her heart grew wildly, tormenting her day and night. Xiao Yunhuan visited her once. At that time, Lady Lu had just given birth to a son, and the Qiao mansion was filled with joy and celebration, firecrackers ringing out for several nights, each sound piercing Xianyang's bleeding heart. When Xiao Yunhuan came, she was drifting in and out of a dazed sleep, feeling him bury his face in her neck, silently weeping with tears falling silently and burning. She lay back, opening her eyes without moving for a long time, suddenly emitting a cold laugh. "Why cry? Doesn't your child have eyes? Is he a monster?" She cursed the newborn child in the most vicious language imaginable. Xiao Yunhuan was shocked, clearly not expecting her to wake up. Stiffening, he trembled in the dim room, stuttering, "Xianyang, I..." She laughed coldly again, speaking to him word by word, Don't pretend anymore. You locked me up here because you were afraid I would ruin your reputation and future, right? No, more importantly, to destroy your happy family, your beloved wife and son. Perhaps she was truly mad. Xiao Yanhuan couldn't bear to listen any longer and couldn't stay any longer. Before leaving, he stood by the door and whispered softly to her, "Xianyang, take care of your wounds. I'll come to see you again another day." She laughed until tears streamed down her face, gritting her teeth. "My wounds will never heal. I will never have a child. I will be alone for the rest of my life. Should I go find a child to raise and care for me until the end?" Xiao Yanhuan's body shook violently by the door. She couldn't see the tears in his eyes, only hearing him suddenly say something nonsensical. "Xianyang, endure a little longer. Wait until I finish what I must do." What must he do? She didn't know. All she knew was that she didn't wait for Xiao Yanhuan. She only waited for the malicious smile of Lady Lu. During that time, Xiao Yanhuan seemed to be handling a major case, staying at the Grand Justice Minister's residence for half a month without returning home. She was suddenly dragged out of the dark room by Qiao Mansion's servants. Lady Lu carried her child, accusing her of poisoning and attempting to kill her son. How absurd. She hadn't even stepped out of that dark room, so how could she harm Lady Lu's child? Clear as a mirror in her heart, she knew Lady Lu simply wanted to take advantage of Xiao Yanhuan's absence to find an excuse to eliminate her. Sure enough, those servants raised their sticks and mercilessly beat her to near death. Refusing to accept death like this, she crawled on the ground in a pool of blood. Lady Lu approached with her child, stepping heavily on her hand and crushing it underfoot. She let out a piercing scream. The hand that had raised Xiao Yanhuan was now mangled and bloody. Lady Lu squatted down, her beautiful face carrying a cruel smile as she whispered word by word into her ear. "Don't think I can't find out who you really are. Did he really think he could deceive me? After today, whether you're his distant cousin or his wretched wife, you must disappear from this world." I was beaten to the brink of death, carried into that dark room to await my end. How could I resign myself to die like this? I widened my eyes, holding on to my last breath. "Without waiting for your return, without asking you face to face, you heartless beast, I can't die in peace." Under the moonlight, Shen Xianyang's eyes were bloodshot, her body trembling. She wept bitterly, appearing almost mad. "I thought I had a second chance at life, raising another Qiao Qiao, one who would never betray me. But from the very beginning, you deceived me thoroughly, Xiao Yanhuan. You treated me so cruelly." In the courtyard, that handsome figure desperately shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "Xianyang, please listen to me. Don't come any closer." Shen Xianyang's voice pierced the night sharply. Xiao Yanhuan's body trembled violently, the cold wind brushing through his clothes and hair. His heart ached deeply, finally kneeling on the ground, tears flowing like a fountain. "Actually, nothing is as you think it is. Xianyang, I never intended to betray you." The tangled and complex truth, spanning across lifetimes, how could it be expressed? Shen Xianyang never knew that Xiao Yanhuan harbored a secret. When she adopted him all those years ago, she had asked about his background. He vaguely mentioned a disaster in his hometown, fleeing for his life. But the truth was far from that. Xiao Yanhuan hailed from a scholarly family, generations living within the imperial city, truly a distinguished lineage. However, when he was 7 years old, his family suddenly fell into turmoil, targeted by a powerful and treacherous court official. His ancestors fought desperately to clear his name and save his life, leaving behind the last seedling of the Qiao family. Escorted out of the imperial city by a loyal servant, fatefully, the servant fell ill on the way, leaving him stranded in the village where Shen Xianyang resided, curling up at her doorstep. Beneath his gentle and pitiful appearance, he harbored a burning heart filled with hatred. With a strong conviction to survive and seek justice for his family in the future, he diligently studied alongside Shen Xianyang. He dreamed of going to the capital someday to take the imperial examination, achieve fame, and embark on an official career. He aimed to enter the Grand Justice Ministry to reopen the case of his family and clear their name. But he was too naive. When he finally went to the capital for the examination, harsh reality dealt him a heavy blow. He discovered he wasn't even qualified to take the exam. That treacherous official held immense power and had his name struck off the list of candidates as soon as he entered the imperial city. With no one to turn to, he lingered in the capital, his savings dwindling until he had no choice but to set up a stall selling calligraphy and paintings to survive. While struggling in such dire circumstances, he encountered a special guest. This guest greatly admired his talent, praising his auspicious appearance and questioning why he hadn't sought fame and fortune. This simple question led him into a prestigious mansion. It turned out this special guest was none other than Minister Liu, a high-ranking and influential figure in the court. Coincidentally, the same Minister Liu was the archenemy of the official who had destroyed his entire family. Upon hearing his story, Minister Liu immediately conceived the idea of using him to overthrow his political adversary. He didn't mind using him as a pawn. However, at that moment, Minister Liu made another demand. He must marry his daughter. The reason for this demand was solely because, at the time, his daughter, Lady Liu, was already nearly 2 months pregnant. She had eloped with a palace guard and been secretly brought back. Although the guard had been quietly killed, the child in her womb had become a headache for Minister Liu. No matter what, Lady Liu refused to abort the child. Just when Minister Liu was at a loss, Xiao Yunhuan appeared. He seemed like a fortunate son-in-law sent by heaven. Not only did Minister Liu favor Xiao Yunhuan, but Lady Liu, infatuated with appearances, was also willing to let Xiao Yunhuan become the father of her child. After much struggle, Xiao Yunhuan finally gritted his teeth and agreed to this arrangement. Yes, it was an arrangement, with both sides getting what they wanted. Xiao Yunhuan regained his qualification for the imperial examination. After achieving the top scholar position, with the aid of Minister Liu's influence, Xiao Yunhuan smoothly entered the Grand Justice Ministry. He began working on overturning his family's case and preparing to completely bring down that treacherous official. Everything became clearer and clearer. However, deep within his heart, a slender figure kept appearing. Xian. Just the thought of her softened Xiao Yunhuan's hardened heart. His agreement with Minister Liu was merely a temporary expedient. He felt no romantic feelings toward Lady Liu. His heart belonged only to Xian. He planned to settle everything and then return to find her, to live a secluded life together away from worldly affairs. I was on the brink of success. That treacherous official was almost brought down. I had prepared an escape route for myself. Once everything was resolved, I could retire peacefully with you, far away. But at the most critical moment, you appeared. His plans were completely disrupted. He could only introduce her as his distant cousin. Given Minister Liu's immense power and Lady Liu's deceitful nature, he feared they might harm her. He would rather have her seen as a madwoman, keeping her close under his protection until he could take her away after settling matters. But he never expected that one push would result in her losing the ability to bear children. His heart bled. He endured grief day and night. Finally, when Lady Liu gave birth, he seized the chance to see her, silently weeping into her neck. When she woke, she harbored deep hatred toward him. When she spoke of never having children again and being forever alone, he couldn't bear it. He said to her, Xian, endure a little longer. Wait for me to finish what needs to be done. It was almost done. Only the final move remained. He stayed at the Grand Justice Ministry for half a month, just to handle the case that could bring down his enemy. Finally, with the dust settled and the treacherous official toppled, he had avenged his family. Rushing back to the Qiao mansion, he suddenly learned of her ordeal, struck like lightning. I thought I had lost you forever. You don't know how grateful I am to the dream pill to let me live again, to start anew. I swear I will never let you down in this life. But the grievances of my Qiao family must also be resolved. I had everything planned. In this life, I would find another way. I would go directly to the White Dragon Temple to see the Emperor, avoiding any further entanglement with Minister Liu. After I bring down our enemies and settle all debts, I can be with you without any worries, never to be separated." Under the cold wind of the moonlit night, Xiao Yunhuan wept bitterly. Xian trembled, retreating in disbelief, shaking her head. "I don't believe you. You're lying to me, aren't you?" "Xian, I won't lie to you anymore, never again." Xiao Yunhuan approached, his voice choked with tears. Just then, a cold wind swept through the sky, and a distant voice echoed, "He did not lie to you." The flowers, trees, and everything in the courtyard seemed frozen in time, as snowflakes gently fell from the sky. A figure descended amidst the snowstorm, with silver frost on his forehead, his black hair flying. He was exquisite and aloof, exuding an aura that seemed unearthly, far from an ordinary man. Xiao Yunhuan and Xian looked up in astonishment at the ethereal figure, Dream Pill. The man who descended from the heavens was handsome and cold, just like the younger version of the Dream Pill. More accurately, he was the older version of the Dream Pill. The two of them were like brothers. The man raised an eyebrow, his demeanor cold and distant. "I am not the Dream Pill. My name is Xuemingchuan, the master of the Golden Goblet Valley." The Dream Pill you speak of is actually a pillow demon that escaped from the Golden Goblet Valley. Blackwood transformed, the pillow demon escaped. Shortly after Xuemingchuan dealt with the matters of Qianxiu, he woke up in a cold sweat for several days in a row, which was highly unusual for him. He hadn't dreamt in many years, and ordinary dream demons were no match for him. After sensing throughout the Golden Goblet Valley and finding no intruders, his gaze suddenly fell on an object on his bed, a hollowed-out blackwood pillow. Its patterns were ancient, having witnessed countless dynasties rise and fall. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but its texture was smooth and emitted a faint fragrance, brimming with spiritual energy. He had used this blackwood pillow for many years without incident. On that day, upon closer inspection, he noticed a barely perceptible white mist swirling around the pillow, as if it had come to life. Holding his breath, he slowly reached out with a palm glowing with a faint blue light, intending to probe the blackwood pillow. Just as he was about to sense the pillow, he was suddenly interrupted by Xian bursting in. A breeze stirred the curtains, a flash of white light. When he looked again, the blackwood pillow on the bed had vanished without a trace, having escaped. It's a piece of dark wood, eternal and incorruptible for thousands of years, which I've used as a pillow for many years. Over time, quietly absorbing my spiritual power, it has transformed into a pillow demon and escaped from the Golden Goblet Valley. Because of this, the human form created by the pillow demon bore such a striking resemblance to Xuemingchuan, merely resembling his youth. Under the swirling snow, Xiao Yunhuan and Xian listened in shock, unable to believe it. Xuemingchuan spoke clearly. "I've come to take you away. You've both been deceived by that demon. You haven't been reborn. This is merely a dream he's fabricated." The pillow demon was cunning, using this method to slowly consume people's life force unnoticed, absorbing their essence to strengthen itself. You haven't lived another life. You've merely fallen into a dream. Everything here is false. Only you are real. If you don't come with me now, you'll die in this dream, forever feeding that pillow demon. Before Xuemingchuan could finish speaking, the fragrance of ancient wood drifted in the wind, and a voice chuckled from the sky. "Master of the valley, you've chased after them so quickly. At least let them finish this beautiful dream before deciding." Xuemingchuan looked up abruptly. The youth wore a brown robe and stood barefoot in the snow. With flowing long hair and a face resembling his own but younger, the youth tilted his head and smiled mischievously. "Master of the valley, good to see you well. Monster, how dare you leave the valley and harm people? Quickly, come back with me." Xuemingchuan's pupils contracted. "Monster?" The youth hugged himself, laughing recklessly in the wind and snow. "I'm clearly the pillow immortal. Look, I haven't targeted those who are living well. I've only chosen those who are deeply obsessed and nearing the end of their lives, just like these two." He pointed at Xiao Yunhuan and Xian. "Master of the valley, just look at how pitiful they are. In reality, one is barely alive and the other is in unbearable pain. They were already nearing the end of their lives. Before their deaths, I wove a beautiful dream for them, giving them a final journey. What's wrong with that? If you insist on taking them away, forget about Xian. Just consider Xian. If she goes out now, she'll only meet her end in that dark room. Wouldn't it be better to let her finish this dream? After all, dying in a warm and beautiful dream is better than dying in a miserable reality, don't you think? Shuemingchuan frowned deeply, sweeping his wide sleeves. Still trying to argue? You truly haven't changed your evil ways. Come back with me to the Golden Goblet Valley. I don't want to go back to the Golden Goblet Valley. The world is vast, and I can do as I please. The youth laughed and turned to escape. The fragrance of ancient wood wafted away with the wind, and his voice faintly echoed from the sky. I'm not playing with you anymore. This dream can't continue. Don't blame me. Blame this heartless master of the valley. With that, he vanished without a trace. The wind and snow intensified in the world, and the dream began to collapse. Shuemingchuan didn't have time to chase after him. Instead, he urgently reached out to the two figures on the ground. Quick, come with me. Xiaoyanhuan held Xianyang close and tightly grasped Shuemingchuan's hand. Thank you, Master of the Valley. Xianyang, let's go. But Xianyang in his arms looked stunned, murmuring, it was just a dream after all. In the end, I will still die alone in that room. What meaning was there in going outside? The pillow demon was right. Rather than dying in a miserable reality, it was better to die in a warm and beautiful dream. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Suddenly, she pushed Xiaoyanhuan away and let herself drift into the wind and snow. Tears streamed down her face. Xiao, go. I don't blame you anymore. Love or hate, after all the twists and turns of life, in the end, it's you who stays by my side. Whether it's in this life or the next, we've shared a beautiful dream together. No, Xianyang. Xiaoyanhuan reached out into the raging storm, trying to grasp the fading figure. But Xianyang smiled at him. Xiao, goodbye. At that moment, Xiaoyanhuan did something unexpected. He let go of Shuemingchuan's hand and, amidst the swirling wind and snow, walked towards Xianyang. If you won't go, then I won't go either. Let's die together in this dream. Without her in the outside world, what meaning was there in his solitary existence? With his vengeance fulfilled and nothing left to tie him down, he'd rather die alongside her in this dream, accompanying her on the road to the afterlife. As the sky collapsed and the earth crumbled, amidst the howling wind and snow, their hands finally grasped each other's. In the last moment before the dream shattered, Shuemingchuan turned his head to look at them, sighing endlessly. Golden Goblet Valley, enveloped in white, snowflakes drifting leisurely. Above the deep pool, two azure water lilies swayed gently, each containing a flickering soul. Shuemingchuan stood on the shore, gazing for a long time. Beside him, Ji Firen clicked his tongue. The souls are shattered like this, yet you still want me to nurture them with the water from the deep pool. Shue, are you mad? Shuemingchuan remained motionless for a long time, finally shaking his head with a sigh. These two poor souls. Do your best for them. With these words, he swept his sleeves and trod lightly through the falling snow. The two water lilies floated on the water's surface, leaning on each other, seeming to murmur softly in the wind. Xiao, I raised you. Will you marry me?